This is Professor Stephen Pollock. Professor Pollock, would you like to tell us a little bit about your current work?
I'm a full professor in the physics department. I work in the research field of physics education, formerly a nuclear theorist, but now 100% doing research in how students learn, especially in the upper division in physics.
Could you tell us a little bit about what got you interested in physics? What really made you decide that physics was the thing for you?
So you're asking me to go back to, like, undergraduate?
Sure, or even before that. You know, what was your first cognizant memory of really knowing that physics was the career path that you wanted to take?
Well, it's a good question. So I would say in high school I was a mathophile. So I thought math was the direction I was going, and physics, in fact, was not so much fun for me in high school. Didn't really have the best teacher and wasn't that excited about it. It was one of the subjects that I liked. But it was really undergraduate when I started taking physics classes, and they just seemed more and more interesting. There was also a sort of a funny reverse process of elimination. I was interested in math and physics and chemistry and computer science, and semester after semester I would kind of lose interest in a course and sort of drop that major as an option. And after I'd gotten rid of computer science, chemistry, and math, I was kind of left with physics. So there was this period when it was just, I was doing it because it was fun, and that was kind of all that was left. But I would say the interest continued to increase. So.
Okay, great. And then, so throughout undergraduate, you obviously followed a regular physics course. What did you do for your master's and your PhD?
So it was really a PhD program. The master's kind of came along for the ride, as is often the case in physics. So I went to Stanford. I was an undergrad at MIT. I went to graduate school at Stanford. I began working in an experimental group doing low-temperature physics, but I shifted to a theory research project in nuclear physics, and that's what I did my PhD in.
Let me ask you some questions about science writing.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of science writing do you do for your job?
So the primary science writing that I do is technical research papers, physical review, American Journal of Physics. So it's basically presentation of research results and publication in a formal venue. I occasionally write articles. So I've been a co-author on articles in, say, Physics Today or Science, which are a little bit broader. Well, the Science is also a technical article. Physics Teacher. So these are articles which are a little bit less research-focused and more communicating what we've been working on.
Okay.
To a broader public.
Great. How important do you think it is that scientists are able to communicate their work to the broader public?
To the broader public, not to other scientists?
Not to other scientists, yeah.
Well, it's a good question. It's really, really important that some scientists be able to do that very well. Whether it is necessarily the case that every scientist needs to be able to do that well is not quite so clear to me, because that might just be overkill. There's only so many venues. I mean, it also depends on what you mean by communicating. I mean, I think you're talking about written communication?
Yeah, sure.
Because I would argue that it's pretty important for essentially any physicist to be able to communicate what they're doing to the non-scientist public. I mean, I have to meet people at a party and convince them that the physics research that's going on at CU is interesting and worthy of taxpayer support and maybe even interesting to them personally. But that's different than written communication. So yeah, without that, science is in deep trouble because people are working in the ivory tower, and without communicating to the public who are ultimately paying for it, it seems like there's a serious problem.
So you think that publications like New Scientist or people like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Nye are very important to the science community?
So I do think that. And so Bill Nye Neil deGrasse Tyson, those are definitely important players. Also, bloggers who are there's physicists now who are sharing particle physics research in ways that it's pretty obviously being read by a lot of people. So it's not just the sort of, I would categorize both of those guys as very pop. So they're really trying to reach anybody who watches TV or something. So that's important, but I'd say there's also these other niches of people who have some interest in science and want to actually learn some science, as versus people who don't know much science at all, who we are trying to help understand why you might care.
Writing for grants and grant applications,
Sure.
is that something that's different than what you normally do? Is it a different style of writing?
It is definitely different. Writing grants is something that one has much less training in, and if you think about it, as you're learning science as a graduate student and then a postdoc, much of what you do is reading and interpreting other technical scientific papers. You never read anybody's grant proposal unless your advisor lets you help them work on theirs. And so there's very little practical experience for young scientists to learn about that process. And then all of a sudden your career depends on it. It's a kind of a crazy social situation. So yeah, it's really important, and it's somewhat different. When I think about how I write a research grant, yeah, it's about promise of future work rather than trying to detail the outcomes of an experiment or a theoretical paper. So somehow there's different goals, and so it is a different process.
So you say that undergraduates don't get much experience in grant application writing. Do you think that's something that would be important, that should be taught in a science writing class?
What an interesting question. So sure, it seems like for somebody who wants to be a scientist, learning how to write grant, I mean, undergraduates should know how to write grants so they can get an NSF graduate student grant, and then graduate students, and there's plenty of grants out there accessible to people at all stages. So it's not just an abstract exercise. I mean, there is this issue of you can talk to an undergraduate, or you can help an undergraduate to learn how to write a grant, and there's only so many opportunities that they're going to have to practice that. So there may be a sense in which it's a little bit premature. To the extent that writing a grant has a relationship to, say, writing a job application or a graduate school application, that's certainly useful. But those aren't the same thing either. So I guess, I'm thinking about this for the first time right now. It's one of those things that at first glance seems like really important and good idea, but I could imagine that you can focus somebody's attention on something that isn't meaningful to them right now, and so the lessons may not be so effective. Sometimes there's a right time when somebody really needs it, and that's when they can learn the best.
So you just mentioned to me that sometimes you have to create multimedia projects. How common is this in the science world, and how important do you think it is that scientists learn to create multimedia projects?
Yeah, so I mentioned it because I've done it. It is not that common, and the two opportunities that I've had were both somebody approached me. In both cases, it was from a company, really, different companies, and so in a sense, these are alternate communication modalities that are, one of them was aimed at, I would say, general public. One of them was aimed at students, undergraduate level, maybe even high school level students. So it was a very unique opportunity, and I had absolutely no idea how to do it, but I was working with professionals who helped me in the crafting of it. So how important is it to teach people about that? It may be increasingly important. Faculty may be under some pressure to be generating multimedia products, MOOCs, some way of communicating with students that's not a textbook and not a technical paper. I don't think there's a whole lot known about it yet in terms of sort of social norms and conventions about how to do it right, unlike technical papers where there's very well established norms about what's acceptable and what's not. Yeah, just something new that's sort of on people's radar.
Okay, but do you think it'll become increasingly important in our, much more digitized and fast-paced world now?
Maybe. Maybe. I think at least in the short term, there will be increasing demand for it. Whether it's a fad or a long-lived new mode of communication remains to be seen, but it's certainly a possibility. My fear is that it will be for a while, and then it'll be something else, because things are changing rapidly, and so you could put a lot of effort into learning how to make a video blog, and then there'll be some other technology in 5 or 10 years that will make that completely outdated.
Okay, so final question. We've talked about a couple of different types of writing. We've talked about writing for the general public from a scientist's perspective. Mm-hmm. We've talked about research writing, writing your research for other scientists. And we've talked about grant applications, that kind of writing. Which of those 3 types of writing do you think is most important to be taught? Or do you think it's more important that they just teach general writing, as in good grammar, good English, good writing?
Yeah, no. So for a young career scientist, publish or perish is absolutely still correct. It's just a political reality. So in terms of career advancement, it is getting papers published in scientific papers for other scientists that is of first priority for any young postdoc, and then a new professor. So to me, it seems like the writing of technical papers for other scientists is the highest priority. Writing for the general public, pretty low priority for a young scientist who is still being evaluated not on how well they're communicating with the public, but on how many publications they're getting. And getting grants is somewhere in the middle. You have to get them, but you only have to get a couple in the first N years, 7 years, and many grad students and postdocs don't have to do that at all, whereas they still also have to be publishing all the way along. So I would say that one wins in priority in my mind.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
This is nice.